Well, you guys saw that we had the wrong torque converter in the Trailblazer when we went down to Florida. We knew we did. Obviously, that torque converter is built for a nitrous setup. And when we ran it naturally aspirated, trying to get this cam only record, well, it was way, way worse than what we thought. And I knew it was going to be bad, but we have decided to go ahead and get this thing right. So we're leaving a lot of ET on the table with the wrong torque converter in it. But we've done a thing. We've taken the transmission out. Got the converter out, and while we got the transmission down, just kind of cleaning a couple things up in here, but everything looks pretty good. But guys, I want to show you what we got here. So obviously we need to go back to an NA torque converter to try and get this cam only Trailblazer SS record. And I went back and forth on, what torque converter manufacturer to use. We had a Pro Torque in it before. Obviously it works great when we spray it. Been 139, 60 foot in that thing for as heavy as it is and no more horsepower than it makes. Pretty happy with it, but when you run it in NA, not going to work. So, kind of went back and forth on what torque converter companies to use, and I've never used a Circle D torque converter before. Heard a lot of good things about them. So we did a thing, and we done got us a brand new unit. So we ordered this thing a couple months ago. Just came in. This is the old Pro Torque converter that came out of her. But wanted to show you guys kind of what this thing is about. And it is going to work, I'm hoping, pretty good. So we've spec'd this thing to where it's going to stall pretty high. And everybody's going to probably ask what stall it is. Well, we're going to do the right thing and just take it probably straight to the track and see what it does. But this right here, man, this thing's packaged pretty good. So we have, man, I'll tell you right now, a whole lot of things packaged this good. So here is our new torque converter for this. Now we are running a 4L80E transmission, so obviously it's a 4L80E converter, but she looks pretty good. A little hard to do one-handed, but so that's going to be her. So just had it built, and one thing I do like about this, it is a 6-bolt setup instead of the 3 bolts of that. I always feel like on these heavier weight cars that they really should have 6-bolt setup in it. But anyway, guys, that's her. So let's get to it. So bad news. I always like to make sure when we get parts, they are correct before we just go blindly installing them. And we have an issue. And literally the second I took this converter out of the box and set it on the table, I noticed that the pad heights are obviously very different. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, this is where the converter bolts up to the flex plate on these pads right here. So, pull a couple of dimensions real quick from the end of the pump snout to the face of the flex plate here, and then same thing, I pulled this cover off, and then from the end of this pump snout to this, they're both like 6 7/8. So the bodies of the converters are basically identical. So we've got an issue here with the pilot that goes into the back of the crank. So you can see this pilot here on the Pro Torque converter. It's probably, I don't know, just rough estimate, about 1 inch long. On my Circle D, it's a lot shorter. And it ain't got nothing to do with the way this back housing shaped. Actually took like a straight edge and went from the pad and measured to the height of the pilot. And of course you can see, I mean, just kind of lay them on the table here, they are substantially different. So that's not good. So that led me to start doing some dimensions, sticking the converter up there against the flex plate that we've got in the truck, and that pilot is not going to engage into the back of the crank. And that's important because that's what keeps the converter centric. You don't want to rely on just the bolts to keep all that balanced. Really need that, kind of like a input shaft on a manual transmission. That thing's got to be dead centered on the crank to support the weight of the converter and the RPM and all that. So this is an issue. So update. I talked to Circle D, and they I guess we kind of figured out what was going on. So they built this converter for a 4L80E. I talked to them the other day. It's been like 3 days since I tried to put this in, and they built this converter for a 4L80E flex plate, and on like a 4L80E flex plate setup, basically it uses a spacer, so it pushes the locator for that pilot farther out. Miscommunication, I guess. So we're gonna adapt some stuff, and they sent me a pilot extension that you can put on right here on the end of the pilot that basically necks down and then goes into the crank. The problem is this is actually this pilot part right here is actually a little bit too long. So what that does is when I slip that pilot extension on and push into the back of the crank, it actually holds the pad off of the flex plate. So that ain't gonna work. If this pilot was milled down more, once that thing went on, it would have worked, but that ain't gonna work. So what we've done is I made a piece here, and let me show you what we did real quick. So really the fix is, to do this right, is send the converter back. They can change this back cover, put a longer pilot snout on it, or you could change everything, put a 480E flex plate on it, but like I don't want to buy another SFI flex plate. It's kind of buying stuff twice for no reason. Unfortunately, I'm in a time crunch, so I've got to kind of take matters into my own hands because we want to go testing this Saturday. So what I did was I got a 4L80E spacer. So if you run like a standard short crank, like which is on all the cars and basically anything other than a early LQ4, this goes against the crank, and then a 4L80E flex plate's flat, so that goes on this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the spacer, and instead of putting it in between the crank and the flex plate, we're going to keep the dished flex plate that I have now. And what we'll do is we'll go over here real quick and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to leave the dished flex plate that I got on here now. This is an SFI flex plate, and I'm just going to pop the bolts out, and I'm going to bolt this on top. And I know some people are like, what are you doing? Trust me, I'm a semi-professional. We got this. So this is actually going to go on top of the flex plate in between the converter, and then we got new bolts, you know, to bolt this on, to bolt it all down. There's plenty of room in between the flex plate and the converter for this. So I've already checked all that. So basically, you know, flex plate, this spacer, and then all this really does is just provide an extension for that pilot to slide down into. So basically, when everything's bolted up, it's just like that right there. So stays nice and centric. And you can see we got plenty of room in here for the bolts. I did machine 1/8 of an inch off of this. So when this goes on, we've got plenty of room for this converter to flex in case this back cover tries to balloon or anything like that. So no concerns there. But when everything's installed, it'll be right there. So not ideal, you know, given the situation here. We got to make a decision. We've got to go to the track. We've got to go testing because we've got the Diesel Truck Wars race next week. So this is what we're going to do. Like it or not, that's what's happening. And of course, we got some longer bolts here. Same thing. Not going to throw ARPs in it for right now because actually, I don't think we're going to be running this converter for too long. I've got some extra power that we're going to be putting in that thing. So we'll actually go back, probably back to this converter and just use this converter to try and set that cam only record, maybe even a head cam record. I don't know. Anyway, guys, let's go ahead. Let's get this stuff together. And just like that, we have got everything in here, and probably ain't gonna be able to see anything, but kind of buried down in there. That worked out perfect. I know you can't see it, but y'all just gotta take our word for it. So we are good to go. Got everything buttoned up. Everything's back together. So all we need to do now is go ahead and get this thing ready for the racetrack. So got the street wheels and tires on it from when we were driving on the street down in Florida. So we'll go ahead, we'll get the 10.5-inch slicks on the back of it, put our racing front runners on it, clean this thing up, because honestly, I haven't even touched it since 6 weeks. So we'll get this thing all together. We're going to try and go testing here in a day or two. Weather forecast, not looking good, but fingers crossed everything works out. We haven't run any 770 races with the cam in it, and of course, obviously, this brand new converter. So I really do not want to go down to the race and have to get that figured out in time runs. And I don't know, just competition's way too close to be doing it the day of the race. Well, here we are Saturday morning, and we got rained out. All right, guys, so we just put a little bit of changes in the Holly setup here, and we're gonna go try this thing real quick, see what it does. Need to bump that idle down just a little bit, but man, moment of truth. I've been waiting to get this converter in here, so let's see what she does. All right, not too bad. So that was about 3,900 on the trans brake. Soon as it launched, probably ran up to about, I'd say probably about 5,200. And then probably about 60-foot mark is 57, 5,800. So a lot closer to where we want to be on RPM. Now, granted, it did spin a lot. But time to go to the track, show some numbers, get this old girl cleaned up from being down in Florida and driving in rain and being on the hauler and driving back. So anyway, guys, this is about all we're gonna do. I'm gonna change the intake setup back around on it. It might even run this thing with no hood. I don't know. I need to try and get some nose weight off this thing. It's so heavy on the nose, so might have to think about that one. But in the meantime, guys, sorry we couldn't go to the track today. Mother Nature had other plans.